down trees, flooding, and landslides. Cleanup efforts underway around Taiwan after Typhoon Kong-rey leaves a trail of destruction.
Here in Cheshang, a valley in eastern Taiwan known for producing Taiwan's best rice, farmers are coming to terms with the damage caused by Typhoon Kong-rey.
What to do about guns? That's a debate that looms over virtually every U.S. election. We speak to advocates in the country to find out how this issue is impacting Asian Americans. Plus, world-renowned jazz musicians share their tunes and impart wisdom to Taiwan's next generation of musicians. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Liao. Cleanup efforts have begun across Taiwan after Typhoon Kong-rey left 2 people dead, hundreds injured, and a trail of destruction in its wake. The typhoon was the strongest storm to hit the country in nearly 30 years, downing trees and electrical wires and blocking roads across the country. We bring you coverage from Taiwan's northeast coast, where shopkeepers are finding it hard to get back to business, and the east coast as hundreds of people look to return home after landslides in mountainous areas. In southeastern Taiwan, farmers were just days away from harvesting their crops when Kong-rey hit. Liao reports from a rice farming community to see how they fared.
Rice farmer Liang is saving what he can from this year's harvest. Much of his crop was just destroyed by Typhoon Kong-rey, which hit this valley in eastern Taiwan with winds of up to 180 kilometers an hour and caused widespread flooding.
因为真的到割稻前10天了啦，所以稻子很重，所以说那么大的台风，风加雨，真的损失最少都是30% 以上。
Typhoon Kong-rey took many here off guard. It was especially large and hit unusually late in the typhoon season, when rice is at its most delicate. At this time of year, this valley is usually a sea of gold with ripening rice. Now plants lay flat and sodden in the fields. Cheshang is known for producing some of Taiwan's best rice, and thousands of people here rely on the industry to get by. Cheshang is a small farming community, far from Taiwan's urban centers in the north, now counting the cost.
这个后果真的是非常严重了，也让农民在这半年的心血几乎是泡汤的。
Like in many places around the world, Taiwan's farmers are battling a changing climate.
Typhoons become more unpredictable when they happen, so farmers have to figure out, like, well, to what extent are they prepared for other unpredictable events, and in that case, it requires a lot of flexibility to continue their farming operations.
As he tallies the damage, Farmer Liang is determined to take what lessons he can from this latest storm. Farmers like him have always had to contend with the weather here, but he says the old rules no longer apply. Ryan Wu, Chris Ma and Liao in Taidong County for TaiwanPlus.
As Taiwan returns to work after Typhoon Kong-rey, people in Yilan are finding it hard to get back to business as usual. Tiffany Wong reports from Yilan, where business owners foresee a difficult road ahead.
Back to work. These shopkeepers at a market in Yilan are returning to work after the government gave the go-ahead for people to return to school and the office after Typhoon Kong-rey. But there's not much business today after the storm downed trees and caused flooding in the northeast county. The market manager says many store owners are busy cleaning up their businesses.
他们有很多今天都没有开，他有的在打扫了，有的在把那个摊位处理一下。里面是没有什么问题，就是在门口外面这个风大雨又大，有一些帐篷什么都吹走了。
And many store owners are worried that business won't return to normal for a while.
以我的经验是，只要台风来，大概都要一个礼拜，对才会正常。而且这么频繁的，短短的日子里面3个台风，像之前的台风来了，好不容易生意有比较回稳一点，台风又来了，然后菜价又很贵啊，对啊。
And shop owners hope this will be the last of the challenges they face this year. Although there are some people out and about in this shopping district today, it's still a far cry from normal. And shopkeepers hope that their town and their businesses can return to life as usual as soon as possible. Kamashri and Tiffany Wong in Yilan for TaiwanPlus.
People are coming together across Taiwan to clean up the damage caused by Kong-rey. And as John Van Trieste reports, there's a lot to be done.
On Taiwan's east coast, the scars of Typhoon Kong-rey are everywhere. This middle school in the town of Yuli was among the many damaged buildings. And it wasn't just the wind. Multiple rock slides blocked off a major highway down the east coast, and it will be some time before they can be cleared. It isn't all bad news, though. A Czech couple that went missing while on a hiking holiday managed to get an SOS out as the storm overtook them. After a blustery night sheltering in place, a helicopter managed to get them out of the eastern mountains where they'd gotten stranded. Elsewhere in the country, things are slowly returning to normal. After a night of diversions, cancellations, and dramatic failed landings like this one, Taoyuan Airport, the country's main gateway, is back to running as usual. And while some areas have canceled classes and work for a second day, much of the country is back to school or the office. But there are signs Kong-rey won't be forgotten soon. Even here in the capital, Taipei, where damage has been relatively light, there were fallen trees and debris everywhere. Work crews have been at it since dawn, trying to bring life here back to normal. But as the state of this downtown park suggests, there's a lot of work left to be done. Devin Tai and John Van Trieste in Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
Authorities plan to pump oil from a Chinese cargo ship that ran aground off Taiwan's north coast. A preliminary inspection says no oil has leaked from the ship, which was carrying 247 metric tons of oil and 37 tons of diesel. The freighter was abandoned on Wednesday after becoming inoperable due to conditions caused by Typhoon Kong-rey. 17 crew members were rescued by Taiwan's Coast Guard. The ship later ran aground near the new Taipei coast. As Kong-rey barrels towards China, Shanghai is bracing for what may be its worst rains in nearly half a century. Kong-rey has been downgraded to a tropical storm, but it's set to sweep along China's eastern coast over the next 2 days. Shanghai has launched an emergency response for possible flooding, and residents have been warned to stock up on water and food. China's national forecasters have also issued rainstorm warnings for parts of its southeastern and eastern provinces, including Fujian, Zhejiang, and Jiangsu. Ferry and train routes have been suspended. The U.S. presidential candidates are campaigning hard in the final days before next week's vote. Democratic candidate Kamala Harris is trying to shore up support, telling voters the country needs to move away from her rival Donald Trump.
And we know we have an opportunity in this election to turn the page on a decade of Donald Trump trying to keep us divided and afraid of each other. We're done with that. We're exhausted by it. We're done with that.
Harris made the comments at a rally in Reno, Nevada. She had 3 campaign stops in Nevada and Arizona Thursday. Republican candidate Donald Trump was also in Nevada, stoking fears about migration to court voters.
The United States is now an occupied country. Can you believe I have to say that? We're an occupied country. They're coming in, and they're by the thousands, and they have equipment that's military-grade equipment. How do they get that? They have military-grade equipment.
Both candidates are in the Southwest just a few days before the election to appeal to the region's Hispanic voters who have traditionally tended to vote for Democrats. The U.S. has one of the highest rates of gun violence in the developed world. And with only a few days before the country goes to the polls, the issue of gun control is on many voters' minds. When I was in the U.S., I went to find out how Asian Americans are weighing in on the conversation. In a small suburb of northeast Los Angeles, home to a large portion of Los Angeles County's Asian population, is gun shop Arcadia Firearm and Safety. Owner David Liu was born in Taiwan, where guns are strictly controlled. But he had the rare opportunity to grow up around firearms.
My parents never stopped me from learning about firearm. My mom was in the Taipei shooting team when she was young. She was the team captain. And so I always get in touch with airsoft and BB guns.
Liu moved to the U.S. as a teenager after spending his childhood in Hong Kong. He's fluent in both Mandarin and Cantonese, able to have in-depth conversations with Chinese-speaking clients about gun ownership. He holds classes and seminars with the community to help educate those interested in owning guns.
We find a lot of new immigrants and Chinese have a lot of misunderstanding about firearms, and they have problem getting the proper channel and knowledge.
Gun control is a hot topic in America, particularly in the lead up to the presidential election. The U.S. has one of the highest rates of gun violence among developed countries, and there are frequently calls for laws restricting gun ownership. Gun violence is increasingly impacting the Asian American community in the U.S. Data from the country's Centers for Disease Control shows that Asian American gun deaths rose steadily between 2018 and 2022. According to the Pew Research Center, around 6 in 10 U.S. adults favor stricter gun laws. Some camps say restrictions on gun ownership is a violation of the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which guarantees citizens the right to bear arms. Democratic candidate Kamala Harris says she supports the Second Amendment, but would also implement stronger gun control measures, such as a ban on assault weapons and stricter universal background checks when buying guns. Republican candidate Donald Trump, on the other hand, says that Harris's proposals would destroy Second Amendment rights, hinting that he'd have a more relaxed policy on guns. For Liu, gun control should come in the form of encouraging responsible ownership rather than flat-out restrictions on firearms.
To me, the proper gun control is education, using a firearm. And background check, we should have background check. People should be checked. Some people should never have guns. That's a way of controlling the gun.
Over in Texas, viewed as one of the most gun-friendly states in the U.S., nonprofit Asian Texans for Justice's 2024 data polling found that gun safety is a big priority for Asian Americans.
Universally, we all agree about having, common sense gun safety laws like background checks, gun storage laws, taking, the required safety classes with gun ownership. And that is something that is really important to our community.
On the eve of the U.S. presidential election, conversations around gun control and gun ownership are in the spotlight. And it's a conversation some Asian Americans are looking to get in on. Devin Tsai, Jeremy Olivier, and Leslie Liao for TaiwanPlus. This year's U.S. presidential election could come down to just a handful of votes in key swing states. U.S. law allows the millions of American citizens living abroad to vote by mail in their home state. To learn more about the role these voters could play in the upcoming election, Sonia Schlesinger spoke with Susan Suina from the U.S. charity Overseas Vote Foundation.
How does an overseas voter participate in a U.S. election? If they're living abroad, then where in the U.S. are they voting?
And it is done at the local level. They will review it at your election jurisdiction, and that is determined by your last address in the United States. That's your last U.S. residence where you really live. That's where your ballot will be counted, or that determines your election jurisdiction that will process your application, send you the blank ballot, receive your voted ballot, count it, and certify the election afterwards.
How might overseas votes affect the outcome of this year's presidential election, especially in those key swing states where the margins are really close?
The swing states are top of mind this year, and the margins in those swing states can be extremely tight. There were two in 2020, Arizona and Georgia, which were between 10 and 12,000 votes of a margin between the two candidates. And in those two states in 2020, the overseas vote came in a greater number, closer between 18 and 19,000. So right now, that's being looked at very carefully by the candidates, by the parties. To be honest, I've been studying the numbers. It would be tough to extend that beyond to other states. But if we can do that, if that can be done again in Arizona and Georgia, I think it'll make the relevance of the overseas vote that much more important.
Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump has recently said that overseas votes are a cause of voter fraud. Why have overseas voters become a target for these claims lately?
Trump's accusations, and I'm going to say false accusations on Truth Social. This is a pattern of gaslighting. They're sowing the seeds for potential future, claims and delays to counting the vote and examination of ballots. Overseas voter applications go through a lot of scrutiny. We need to provide exactly the same information, exactly that, as a domestic absentee voter. I would say that they're laying the groundwork for future challenges after the election to the integrity of the vote. Any ballot request, any ballot from a UOCAVA voter, I believe will stand up to any scrutiny.
That was the head of the Overseas Vote Foundation, Susan Suina. Coming up after the break, Taipei's district court has announced a decision on Ko Wen-je's release. Stay tuned.
A pivotal election that will impact Taiwan and the world. Will it be President Harris or President Trump?
People, we are moving forward.
Make America great again.
I'm in the United States in the final stretch.
TaiwanPlus has you covered with exclusive reports from California to Texas and Washington to Florida. We'll be there on election night as America decides. Only on TaiwanPlus.
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. In a first, China has carried out exercises with two aircraft carriers, the Liaoning and the Shandong, in the South China Sea. China has territorial disputes with several neighboring countries in these waters. Its Navy says the carrier exercises prepare them for more complex missions. Footage shows the two vessels operating together with the country's newest carrier-based fighter jet. China currently has two aircraft carriers in service. A third, the Fujian, is undergoing sea trials. North Korean state media has released footage of the test launch of its Hwasong-19 intercontinental ballistic missile. The new solid fuel missile flew higher and longer than any previous weapon that Pyongyang had tested. North Korean state media quoted leader Kim Jong-un hailing the launch as a success in manufacturing what he called a nuclear delivery system. South Korea, Japan, and the U.S. have condemned the launch. Taipei's district court has ruled that former Taipei Mayor Ko Wen-je can continue to be detained in connection with a corruption investigation. Reese Ayers was at the court when the announcement was made.
Ko Wen-je can be detained for a further 2 months. That's the decision out of Taipei's district court in Taiwan's biggest political scandal this year. Ko is still technically the leader of Taiwan's third party, Taiwan People's Party, and he ran for president earlier this year. He's been held incommunicado since early September, meaning he can't speak to anyone over fears that he could collude with other defendants during the investigation. His detainment hasn't been without opposition, though. Some of Ko's supporters claiming the case against him is politically motivated. This afternoon, some protesters braving the typhoon debris to protest his continued detention, claiming he's already been held far too long despite no direct evidence against him.
柯文哲主席被
就是在司法不公的状况之下，被我们的北检所控告，然后现在他已经羁押2个月了，到现在他都还没有查到他不法金流。
台湾的人权这样子叫做衰败下去，就民进党政府这样搞是不好。
The court initially detained Kerr after ruling that he clearly knew about illegal real estate deals involving a shopping mall made during his second term as Taipei mayor. The question is, how much did Kerr really know about it? A lot of people close to Kerr are already deeply involved in the case. One former real estate developer has already pleaded guilty, and Kerr's personal secretary, Xu Ziyu, who has already been in Japan for several weeks, is reportedly still abroad, despite calls for her to return, leading some to speculate that she's deliberately avoiding questioning. Ko Wen-je himself has already faced 4 or 5 rounds of questioning. But for now, Kerr is facing 2 more months in detention as this investigation continues. Eason Pan, Leon Lian, and Rees in Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
A new level of cosmic potential may be unlocked as researchers from Japan prepare to launch the world's first wooden satellite. Hurrell Hughes tells us about the inspiration behind this new development in space research.
This small cube of wood, cut, carved, and assembled, will soon orbit Earth as the world's first wooden satellite. Japanese researchers hope it will change the way humans approach space development.
今まで、いわゆるどの国の宇宙開発も、計画していなかったことで、この宇宙で木を使うということが人類が宇宙に、持続可能でですね、永遠に発展していける一つの、方法であると、やり方であるということを、世界の皆さんに知ってほしいと思います。
Low Earth orbit is getting crowded. Scientists estimate there are more than 30,000 pieces of junk hurtling around the planet, adding to the more than 9,000 satellites currently in orbit. Once these satellites exceed their usefulness, they either add to the amount of space junk, or they re-enter the atmosphere and burn up, releasing harmful chemicals, which could eventually change the planet's thermal balance.
今現在使われている衛星はアルミニウム製ですので、これは地球大気圏に再突入させるとアルミナ粒子を作り出して地球大気圏を汚します。
Researchers hope crafting satellites out of renewable materials, like wood, can alleviate the amount of space pollution, and in the long term, lead to timber houses on the Moon and Mars. But first, scientists have to test that wood can survive in space. To build the cube satellite, they looked inward for inspiration, drawing from traditional techniques used in Japan for centuries.
今回、人工衛星の目的で使ったのはホウの木、マグノリアと木の一種類ですけども、伝統的にはやはり加工しやすくって、噴景しにくいという特徴を使ってますので、代表的なところとしましては日本刀の鞘とか、強度を利用して下駄ですね、下駄の刃とかに使われたりするわけですね。
The small cube will make its first mission to the International Space Station in early November and will stay in orbit for 6 months. Scientists hope this will give them the first glimpse into the durability of wood in space and lead to a new level of cosmic potential. Andy Xue and Hurrell Hughes for TaiwanPlus.
2 decades after his last performance in Taipei, Grammy Award-winning musician Wynton Marsalis has returned to Taiwan with the world-renowned Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra. While here, they're meeting with young musicians and performing an eclectic range of jazz subgenres for the country's music lovers. Wesley Lewis reports.
Performing Dixieland, Duke Ellington, bebop, and everything in between, the world-class Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra is in Taiwan. On their week-long visit, the New York City-based band is scheduled to swing by Taipei and Taichung. Leading the ensemble is Grammy Award-winning trumpeter and composer Wynton Marsalis, one of modern jazz's leading figures. Ahead of their opening performance, the group held a welcome event where music students were invited to pick the performers' brains. There, Marsalis imparted some wisdom to aspiring musicians.
First, play.
Really learn how to play. Develop your feeling. So when people come to hear you and your music, it makes them feel a certain way. Then they tell their friends, oh, you got to go here, so and so. Check this out. Then other things come later, like publicity or posting things or putting out recordings and all of this. People get excited about that, but do the quality first.
Born in New Orleans into a family of prominent jazz musicians, Marsalis has spent his career dedicated to promoting the genre. He helped start jazz at Lincoln Center over 3 decades ago, and has performed and given lectures around the world. The last time the orchestra came to Taiwan was in 2002, where they gave one performance at the National Music Hall in Taipei.
I was fortunate to be here 22 years ago also. When we came, that was my second year in the orchestra, 22 years ago, and had such fond memories of Taiwan and being here. And so it's an absolute pleasure for us to be here. We just remember how warmly we were received back then, and it's the same thing that's happening right now.
Now back at the same venue over 2 decades later, Marsalis and the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra are once more inviting audiences in Taiwan to fall in love with the electrifying rhythms in their arrangements, continuing their mission to spread jazz to a global audience. Fu Hua Hong, Kama Shu, and Wesley Lewis for TaiwanPlus.
Thank you for watching TaiwanPlus News. Finally today, check out these athletes and artists taking to the catwalk in Paris with chocolate clothing creations. I'm Liao. Take care and see you next time.